Representative Sullivan, if you want to
Sure.
address this. Yeah, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance first. Huh? First things first. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's
Mr. Chairman,
You know what? I'm going to move over here so I can see everybody. That would be better.
I was waving at the camera.
I'll sit in the big seat.
There you go. Oh, yeah.
Now I feel important.
So in communication with Representative Vale, she has put together an amendment that is identical to the last version we saw, with the exception of lines 15 and 16, which are a couple of other exclusions. This section shall not apply to employees of emergency medical service, law enforcement, public safety officials, and firefighting service. So it seemed to her, and I agreed with her, that excluding these folks from this was appropriate, and that they were not covered by the either 126X or the Section 2 that refers to federal law or regulations. So with that change, we've got a little bit narrower scope on who is covered by this. And excuse me, I'm also drawn to the testimony that Michael, trying to remember, yes, Mike Holt, gave, that this is a relatively small number of folks that are impacted by this, and by having some exclusions, the group gets potentially even smaller. I'm not really sure if these exclusions actually touch on anybody. Oh, there, speak of the devil. But at any rate, there's a copy of the, there you go, right there. No, 15 and 16 are added. They're new. Right. The old 15 and 16 would be something different. Probably what, I'm not sure what it is. Exactly. Just bumped it down.
Okay. We do have David Juvett here from the Business and Industry Association. I'd like to weigh in on it for his folks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name's Dave Juvet. I'm a Senior Vice President for Public Policy with the Business and Industry Association. I guess I would like to preface my remarks so the subcommittee understands the BIA did not take a position on this bill. I was at the public hearing and thought the testimony was profound. We did not testify, we did not sign in with a position, and we're about as close to neutral as an organization like mine would be. So I hope you will take my comments in that spirit. My concern is that this bill could have unforeseen consequences for some employers. And if I were to make a request of the subcommittee and the committee, it would be to retain this bill because, as with Representative Cahill's bill on paid time off. I think there's a kernel of a good idea here that deserves full consideration. And if the committee were disposed to retaining the bill, we would offer up the expertise of our employment attorneys to work with the committee in a proactive way, not to kill the bill, but to try and come up with a bill that everybody thinks would work best. You know, what I do for a living is I have to look at the politics of a situation. And if the committee votes on this bill, even with this clarifying amendment, if it comes out with a 10-10 without recommendation and goes to the House floor that way, it's anybody's guess what would happen. And frankly, I think it would be unfortunate if the bill were to be ITL'd on the House floor, because then you have to start all over again. Whereas if you retain a bill and everyone works cooperatively on it, obviously you don't have to start from scratch. If it were to pass the House, my observation is it would have a real uphill fight in the Senate, and would possibly be a bill that the governor would consider vetoing. Obviously, that's all speculation. But I guess if it were me, I'd like to err on the side of safety and have the bill retained so we can all work on it and then cooperatively come forward in January of next year with something that everybody agrees is workable. Just one last comment on the amendment, which thank you, Representative Sullivan. I just saw it, and I understand the point that has been made on lines 15 and 16, but again, it raises questions because there are a lot of other types of employment that could have impact on the public, like school bus drivers or cab drivers or snowplow drivers. I could probably go on, but my point is, if we're carving out this exemption for these types of employment, shouldn't other types of employment that could impact public safety also be considered? And that's an example of why I think if we didn't feel like we were in a rush to try and get this through this session with all the risks that involves, maybe if everybody sits down, including really smart attorneys who represent employers, perhaps we can come up with something good. And I will tell you, I sent out recently an email to the employer, either HR managers, VPs, and employment attorneys, asking their opinion on the bill. Because I have to tell you, at first blush, the bill, which is a relatively simple one, is not one that left me with a lot of angst. And the responses I got back, which I would like to forward to all of you so you can see them, were interesting because they ran the gamut from some HR managers who acknowledged, look, this is an issue we're going to have to deal with in one form or another eventually, to another attorney who suggested, well, there's a recent New Hampshire Supreme Court case that acknowledged that cannabis for medical use could be part of a reasonable accommodation on the part of employers, to a third attorney that said, you know, the devil's kind of in the details. So my point is, I guess this echoes why we didn't have a strong position one way or the other, even with HR professionals representing employers. There are positions all over the spectrum on this bill. So that can, I don't know if that's helpful. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions, but those are my thoughts.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Representative Sullivan.
I think one of the things that we did at our last meeting, and have done quite a bit since, is look very carefully at section 126X:3 of the RSAs, and that is the prohibitions and limitations on the therapeutic use of cannabis. So when you look at this, with this, it, I think it should relieve not, I won't say it will relieve all anxiety because we're all a little anxious, but it should relieve a lot of anxiety because essentially, um, and I might lean on Michael Holt a little bit here because we've spent a fair bit of time talking about the difference between under the influence versus impaired.
Right.
And arguably somebody with THC in their system, well, I think you're not under the influence long before THC flushes out of the system. Is that accurate? Yeah. But at the same time, someone who's using therapeutic cannabis at some point when it's taking its therapeutic course, one is under the influence, but they are not intended to be impaired. The objective is deal with the symptoms, but stay short of impairment. But says that nothing in this chapter shall exempt any person from arrest or prosecution for operating a motor vehicle, commercial vehicle, boat, vessel, or any other vehicle propelled or drawn by power other than muscular power. Thank you. So we're talking about cab drivers and that type of thing. They're already addressed under 126X3. When it comes to other types of employment, operating heavy machinery or handling dangerous instrumentality. So people on the job who are, at a heightened level of safety concern certainly are excluded from being in or are not protected by this new law. So the bill by itself leaves a lot of unanswered questions. The bill in combination with 126X3, I believe, leaves far, far, far fewer questions. So I would argue that this, if you ask people cold whether they'd have any concerns just reading this, they probably will. If they are given an opportunity to carefully study the 126X3 along with the bill, I think they should have a lot of their concerns alleviated.
That's possible. I will admit I only sent out the original language of the bill because frankly I didn't know that the amendment existed.
And this is our second amendment, so it's tightened it up substantially, and I think we've been working on it, and these folks need protection. As you pointed out, there is a Supreme Court case that protects someone's rights to accommodation. Unfortunately, their protection comes through the courts, which is a pretty painful way of getting there if you are of limited means. You can't afford the lawyers that are going to get you your resolution. So it's a relatively small group of people who are on the program and employed, and there are a lot of folks who are already separated out either through what's in the bill or through what's in the original statute.
Yeah, I'm not arguing with any of that. And again, I want to stress, I'm not here opposing the bill.
I hear you.
I'm here to offer our resources if the committee would like to improve it. And maybe it's been improved to the extent that it could be. I don't know, because I'd like to send the amended language out this afternoon and get some comments on that.
And I guess when you started your testimony, my original thinking was what exactly needs to be improved. And am I correct that you don't presently have an answer to that?
not that I'm comfortable expressing to the subcommittee. What I am comfortable in doing is sending you the unedited emails that I got back, and you'll see that they're all over the map. And then you could make a decision on your own whether the amendment has addressed those concerns or not.
I think that'd be great to have.
Shay.
Thanks for taking my question. So on the Second Amendment, I'm still having a problem with the no employer shall deny employment. I was hoping that that was going to be removed from this amendment because I feel strongly that we should not be legislating at that level. They should be able to make a decision based off of their circumstances. And when I reached out to the employers that I have in my district, with the exception of one who was perfectly fine with smoking marijuana and thinks it should be legal, everybody else was against this bill and asked me to continue to oppose it. So as long as that deny employment is in there, I'm not going to be in favor of this. And the further thing that I thought about after leaving here after the last session and talking with somebody else, I reflected a lot on this whole, the advocating that people will not be taking this while they're at work, that they know better that they can't take this while they're at work. And what was said was, if these people are so uncomfortable or in so much pain or having trouble dealing with whatever their issue is, that they need to be on cannabis, then how is it that they can get through a 10 or an 8-hour shift without being on cannabis, but they can't make it through the night before or the day before or the weekend? And, that made a lot of sense to me. So how is it that they can manage to carve out a 10-hour part of their day where they have no pain and no issue, that they don't need to medicate themselves? I find that hard to accept. I think that they are. So as much as the law says they shouldn't be, and as much as it's written that they shouldn't be and action can be taken, I think that it's very naive of us to think that cannabis users who have a card, who are taking it for pain management or for anxiety or other mental health issues, I think it's naive of us to think that they're not taking that during the day when they're at work.
Representative Sullivan.
I had a feeling that you might still be have concerns about the hiring issue, and I gave a lot of thought to that between then and now, and concluded, especially after looking and thinking about other issues of discrimination. Basically, discrimination protections always include hiring and on-the-job protections. If you find out that someone that you just made a job offer to has a disability that doesn't stop them from doing the job but might require an accommodation, you can't decide not to hire them anymore. That's standard discrimination policy. So I reached the point where, for me, I know where you're at. I understand it. I respect it. But for me, I can't accept having this anti-discrimination bill be different from every other form of discrimination, where you can't discriminate if they're already on the job, but you can discriminate if it's in the middle of the hiring process. So to me, that's a showstopper. And to address the other piece, in reality, 126X3 does allow someone to use cannabis on the job, as long as you have the written permission of your employer. Without that, you can't. And you can have it on the job site with the written permission of your employer. If you don't get that written permission, you can't have it on the site. And there are two different written permissions. One to be under the influence, the other to actually have it on the job site. So number one, you can. And number two, with regard to those who use it at night, I can just give you my personal situation. without going into gory details. But basically, when I got the card, which is expired, by the way, it's it was yeah, it was kind of cool to have. But the I'll keep it in my wallet for another 10 years. The my issue is sleeping at night. The symptoms I had that I got the card for, I still have those symptoms. Um, last night was not good. I was in a recliner all night. And I wish I had something that could have resolved it. Right now I'm here. Do I have symptoms? Yes, but they're not as bad when I'm awake. I don't think I'm alone with that. I think others share that situation and essentially really need help sleeping. And that was a situation I was in. And by God, hopefully not too much longer, but I'm still in it. That really does exist. And people who have symptoms that need to be resolved during the night so they can get a good night's sleep, it's a real thing. So I'll just put that out there.
Representative Colton.
I'd like to follow up on the reasonable accommodation. The reasonable accommodation is unless the employer can demonstrate that the accommodation would impose an undue hardship on the operation of its business. And when you're looking at electricians and crane operators and HVAC technicians and a lot of the trades, I would argue that making an accommodation for cannabis use would be an undue hardship based off of just the safety needs that are needed in those jobs and in those trades. So I'm sorry to disappoint. I don't disagree with Dave as far as retaining this because the deny employment is a hard stop for me. I'm gonna vote against this and I will advocate against this because of the deny employment. I just don't think we should be putting those types of handcuffs on our employers.
And I guess I would argue that you're right about the accommodations. And basically it's already in. I thought it sounded good. But basically it's already in 126A. I mean, I read it a short while ago, if I can find it again. The operating heavy machinery or handling a dangerous instrumentality. So essentially, those employees who are in those situations can be excluded from this. So I think that piece is not a concern. For me, the hiring is not a concern. For you, it is. I get it. But I would hope that we could narrow our difference to that.
Thank you. I've got my concerns still. We have two lines here with to exempt employee different employment. I'm guessing I could probably add another 75 lines to it. I go back to Justice Scalia saying the Constitution says what it says and it doesn't say what it doesn't say. This bill says what it says and it doesn't say what it doesn't say. And the things Representative Kokum just outlined, there's dozens more. I could go as far as somebody sitting at a computer and making a very, very hefty financial mistake. The employer has no recourse. I don't think we can't go there. We argued about people in this program. A lot of them wouldn't take advantage of it, but a lot of them would too. I don't want to say, I have this card, you can't do a darn thing to me. I don't think we should be doing that to employers. And I made that motion to retain. This needs an awful lot of work. It like I said, we could add 75 more lines of occupations that should be exempt. I've got a friend that I saw him the other night. He lost his arm. He was doing a siding job. He was his own employer. Okay, I won't work with this guy because he does everything too darn fast. Okay, they're absent-minded, ADHD, all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of the symptoms that somebody that just smoked a joint would have. And he put up some staging and some pump staging. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but it's got arms that connected to the building. Well, he missed a stud and he put a bolt through some OSB, the follow particle board. And he goes up on the staging and it tore off the wall. And he came down and he broke his arm, but he ended up losing the arm. But I don't want that, if he was an employee, okay, and there's 3 or 4 guys on a crew, and one of them smoked a joint for lunch, and he's got this card, and he missed the stud and just put it into the OSB like Tommy did. Where does that leave the employer? We're opening up a nasty can of worms here. I think I spoke with the insurance commissioner's office, a lawyer there, but he said the insurance commissioner's office had no position on it, but he and I spoke of this type of stuff, and this needs an awful lot of work. I guess for me, until we can tell whether you smoked a joint last night, or 3.5 minutes before you punched in, we're going to have trouble. I don't want to see an employer, a small businessman, losing his home over it. And I can see the ugliness of that coming out. Another quote that I like is Lyndon Baines Johnson. When considering legislation, we not only have to look at all the good it'll do if it's implemented rightly, but more importantly, all the bad it'll do if it's implemented wrongly. And this just has all kinds of holes to implement it wrongly. Representative Susi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to look at it a different way. I think we have, when I was reading this information, I think there's 25 states that do it. So they're able to figure it out. I think the last bill we had, the last time this bill came in, I think what we tried to do and really wanted the bill down too much was to have all these carve-outs. But I go back to this whole thing, and I'm, because it just seems like, and I respect everybody's opinion, but we seem to get fixated on this whole thing of, whether they're going to do it before work, whether they're going to do it, at night. And I'll tell you right now, from someone that you want to talk about sleep deprivation, working in the fire service for 30 years, and somebody told me the day I retired that my sleep was going to get better. Well, it's been almost 7 years, and I can guarantee you that my sleep is no better. So if sleep deprivation was part of the therapeutic cannabis program, I think I'd probably be a card-holding member. Oh, perfect. But on the other side of it, I look at, and what my Representative Colcom was talking about, and I understand, we don't know if somebody's using it at night or if somebody's using it during the day. But I think we can say the same thing about opioids. And I think, again, if we go back to these opioids, I think a lot of the times that people are trying to getting on the therapeutic cannabis program is to get away from the opioids. But we don't test somebody at work, to my knowledge, for the use of opioids
They do.
all the time.
And any accident, any industrial accident, and in occupations that I've been involved in, but I won't say any.
So, and I will say this, because there is a way that they can test to see how much cannabis is in your system. Because I've had a discussion with a very good friend of mine, and it would come from a blood draw. The reality of it is, I think that's very difficult to get. But in the case of an incident that may have harmed somebody at work, I don't think it'd be treated any differently than a DWI that hurt somebody. So if they really wanted to get down to the nuts and bolts of it and find out if that person was impaired, there is a way they can do it. And they can find out, and yeah, it's going to work. But again, it's no different than the DWI where somebody's going to get hurt. So I like the bill. Do I think there's some things that we could work on? I do. But again, my belief is if 25 states in this country have done it and you don't see it, it's not exploding on the TV every night. I'm not watching TV and saying, oh, Rhode Island had this massive, accident at work incident because somebody was smoking cannabis. I don't see it. I don't see it happening. So I don't really think it's creating a big issue, but I respect everybody's opinion and respect, and I would definitely encourage us to continue working on this, because I do think this is something that we should move forward. Thank you.
When I was speaking to the insurance commissioner's office lawyer there, you know, we talked about the other states that have it and everything, and he said he figured it was only a matter of time before, you know, whether it's a workers' comp case or just you know, liability cases, and so it's only a matter of time before all those things start rearing their ugly head. I think we need to work on this, and Representative Sullivan.
Yes, I'd like to make a couple suggestions. I did talk with Chairman Infantine at length last night, and I think he and I agree that if the bill is going to be retained, we'd rather do that with the full committee rather than here. And I guess what I'd like to make sure we do here is, if we, as a subcommittee, feel that this amendment is an improvement over A, the original bill, and B, the earlier amendment, I would suggest that we adopt the amendment, or recommend adoption of the amendment, so that we know what to look at when we get back to the committee. I don't think we want to be looking at the original bill, because I think the sponsors didn't feel like the original bill was well crafted. So I would hate to be back at that point, because I would argue, and I'd hope folks could agree, that this amendment is better. And this happens sometimes. I've done it. I think we've done it as a committee this year. We voted in favor of an amendment that improves a bill, then people in the vote on ought to pass as amended may vote against that as a resolution. So I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that maybe we take up the amendment in terms of whether or not this is an improvement. I did hear Representative Colcom. I think I was clear with my view on the hiring aspect. I believe you would prefer something that didn't include hiring. I can't accept something that excludes hiring. So that's, I think, where we are with the subcommittee. Unless both of my other colleagues feel one way or the other unanimously, but I suspect that's not the case. But I only get one vote. My suggestion is to take up the amendment.
No, it's always been my understanding that a subcommittee like this is only suggestive. We,
Recommending.
you know, recommendation, and you know, I see the amendment as better, but still far from what we need. And you know, we can certainly bring this amendment to the full committee, and you know, use this as part of the you know, the motion to retain, but you know, have this as part of the thing we're going to work with. You know, but I'd still like to entertain a motion to retain. And you know, as far as
I'll make a motion that we retain House Bill 82 with the second amendment back to the committee.
and I'd second that.
As a matter of procedure, you can't retain with the amendment. The amendment has to be adopted. So if we're retaining, we're retaining it, everything.
So I'll make
No.
a motion that we retain House Bill 82.
That's I would second that.
Sullivan votes no.
Susie votes no.
I vote yes.
And the chair votes yes.
Tied vote does not carry. I guess I would make a motion to adopt the amendment as presented. And again, I would encourage the committee to just consider that we're upgrading the bill to a better form, perhaps not a perfect form. Do we have a second?
Representative Colcom.
I vote no.
Representative Susie,
Yes.
Representative Sullivan,
I vote yes.
and the chair votes no. I guess we're going back to committee with a hung jury.
I think that's fine. We can, we've got an exec session next week and we can work it out there. I would argue, I'm arguing again, that we've not wasted our time. I think we've had lots of discussion. I think we have made progress. And I would, intend to bring this amendment to the full committee and see where it lands. But and we'll see where it goes. It will not be the end of the world if it gets retained. But for these folks who are looking to maintain an employed status without the threat of termination or discipline, I think this is important today, not a year from now. So that's why I feel that moving forward would be a good thing. And I firmly believe that the amendment, along with RSA 126X3 in combination, do a good job of getting us as close as we can to where we need to be. I would also suggest, Mr. Gervais, that if you can send that information to us, that would be terrific.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chair, may I make a quick comment?
Yes.
Yeah, I will do that, Representative Sullivan. I'll send it to all four of you and copy Chairman Infantine on it, just so he's aware of it. And I will also send out the language of the amendment and ask for comments on that and see if that changes people's opinion. But you'll see when you get the emails, there were some of our members who didn't have a problem with the bill. Some were on the fence and some thought it could create problems.
Thank you.
Just one question. Would the other members of the committee here be willing to amend the amendment, I guess, on lines 15 and 16 to something or any occupation that or anything that would put the life and safety of others at risk? Put something in there for maybe financial mistakes. To me, we've got to expand those two lines.
I guess I would look back to the original bill as introduced. It has a line in there that says, "This section shall not apply to employment where drug screening tests are required for the safety of persons and property at the job site." It was concluded at the outset that language, which is somewhat similar to what you just suggested, is so vague and so broad that it would exclude virtually everyone. So we were immediately asked not to act on the bill as introduced. And I think that's what we're at risk of. If we use general language, an employer could say everyone is excluded, no one on our job site can be part of the program. If we use specific language and say this list of 75 job descriptions are excluded, the 76th will come in and there will be an issue, because it's assumed that if you have an exhaustive list of employment that is excluded, that everything else is included. And there's a lot of risk in doing that. So I think we want to avoid extremely broad language or extremely specific language. So the bill is, and I would again point out that a lot of employment types are already exempted by the bill. I would encourage everyone to read that, and I would acknowledge that 126X3 is difficult to read. The fact that there's no indentations makes it hard to figure out where one section begins and the next one ends. So it is difficult to read, but if you read it carefully, there are a lot of types of employment that are already excluded. So I think that's really important to look at, because we don't have to read. In fact, and frankly, in talking to the sponsor yesterday, there was an urge to repeat something that's already in 126X3. I think that's a big mistake, because if you say it one way in one section of the law and another way in another section of the law, you don't know which one takes precedent. So, to repeat what's already in the statute for the purpose of emphasis is a bad idea. Basically, we've got 126X3 and we've got the bill that's before us, and the two should not overlap. We should be careful about that.
See, my problem is, a lot of industrial accidents happen in the construction trades. Yet we haven't even mentioned them.
Oh, sure
Okay,
they are. Sure they are.
well-
Not specifically construction, but again, operating heavy machinery, that's happens in construction, or handling a dangerous instrumentality. That's all kinds of tools on the job site that could be considered dangerous.
That says that they shall not be exempt from arrest or prosecution.
Mhm.
That doesn't say anything about it.
Liability.
That does not bring employment into that. It doesn't say that, where in section 3, it specifically says it's referring to employment. So just because somebody's arrested or prosecuted doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to lose their job over this, but they might.
There's so many holes in this that we need to retain it and work on it and close those holes.
I hear you.
I guess I would question why we feel that some positions are more sensitive than others, that they would be excluded. Why do we feel that other positions are not worthy of being excluded from this?
Because essentially the employer is required to make accommodation. The requirement to make an accommodation, if you're a truck driver,
You're exempt.
you can't accommodate that.
Mhm.
However, if you are on a construction job site, lots of accommodations can be made to avoid certain types of activities. So, because as I said, someone who's got a shovel in his hand and digging a hole is not in need of accommodation. And someone who is running dangerous powered equipment might be reassigned to the shovel rather than the dangerous equipment. So, those are the types of accommodations that employers can make. It's a bit of a pain. It's a nuisance. It's an inconvenience, but that's what our anti-discrimination laws do. They protect people and let them stay on the job with reasonable accommodations.
Then would we run into the problem of an excavator operator making $75 an hour reduced to a guy shoveling that's making $17 an hour? And, there's another can of worms that,
Those are issues that need to be resolved.
sure.
But employers can do that.
Well, I could see the excavator operator that can no longer operate that still wanting his $75 an hour and trying to litigate that or go through a union, union grievance. Once again, that can of worms.
I go back to, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. That's all right. We're pretty informal.
I was thinking of a question.
That's dangerous.
I go back to when you have an employee, so the terminated employment or disciplinary, you've got a basis, you know what that employee can do, you know what their performance is like, you have something to measure them on. When you're being forced to hire somebody when it's against your policy and your practices, because we have to now force this law down their throat that they must hire if they can't find a reasonable accommodation or a reason why they are excluded from the reasonable accommodation. They have no basis. They're going on the interview process, which is typically a few hours, talking to, you know, a few people, few hours, and somebody's selling themselves up. We all know it. Or you fake it till you make it. And not every job can be a fake it till you make it type of job. And I just don't think we should be, you know, there's personal responsibility in this. And if I have a cannabis card and I have to take cannabis for whatever the reason, I have a personal responsibility. And my responsibility is also to keep my job. And the ownership is on me. I should not be expecting the employer to be forced to keep me. And I don't think we should expect any employer to be forced to keep somebody. It's personal responsibility. And we have, you know, we can't legislate away from personal responsibility.
But again, and I'll go back to this. There's nothing saying because somebody has a therapeutic cannabis card that they're going to be under the influence or impaired at work. If somebody goes for an interview, right? Somebody goes for an interview, and I think we had this discussion, and they were the best candidate. They were the best candidate by far. And because they all of a sudden take out this and go, oh yeah, just so you know, I have a problem with that, because if they were overall, they obviously had the ability to go in, and I think somebody that, I truly believe that if somebody has to do gummies, if they have to smoke marijuana, if it has to be all the time, they're not going to be able to go through a interview and be the best candidate if they have to be on this stuff all the time. So I think I understand what you're saying, but I think I'd like to see how much is happening right now. It could be going on right now, and just because we want to bring this law forward, now it's becoming a problem. I can guarantee it's probably happening in the workplace right now, and we don't know about it. And so I don't really think it's a bad thing. I think it's trying to get people back to work. And again, there'll be carve outs, but I just think that I think it's not giving these people a fair shot at employment. Especially if they come out and they're the top candidate. I just don't believe that somebody that may have eaten a 5 milligram gummy at night is going to be affected the next morning in an interview. So I'll leave it at that.
It may be that the employer still chooses to hire that person, right? So I'm not saying that by taking this out, the employer is automatically not going to. There are going to be some employers who won't, because that's their policy. And it may be because their worker comp claims. It could be for a lot of reasons. It could just be the nature of the work. But leaving it up to their decision is where I think it needs to be. I don't disagree with you. I think that there's a population of people who are not affected at work to the extent of what maybe we want to over dramatize it to be. But I think the employer should be given the free will to make that decision on their own, to move forward or not. And if they are an outstanding candidate and they want to move forward with that, then let them.
Yeah, I failed to mention that I had about an hour-long conversation with a union organizer that I know, and he was bringing up a lot of the same stuff that we've been talking here. But he kind of concurred that this is a can of worms that needs to be worked on, and it could cause a lot of problems for unions, can cause a lot of problems for employers, workers' comp companies, just regular liability insurance companies. This has tentacles, far-reaching tentacles, I guess you could say, and we've got to tighten this thing up before we present it as something we'd want to become law. That it? Motion to adjourn, anybody?
I would just say, Mr. Juve, are you aware that the exec session is the 15th? Okay.